A man who once killed for the government now stands in the center of a crowd, fist full of cash, eyes locked on the most dangerous enemy he's ever faced. Not across a battlefield, but right here in a dusty frontier town where human beings are sold like livestock. One choice will cost him everything. One woman will force him to fight again. And one tyrant will learn that some men can't be bought, can't be broken, and won't look away when the world tells them to. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The sun hung low over Red Hollow like a copper coin dropped in dirty water, casting long shadows across a town that had forgotten what justice looked like. Caleb Rourke sat on a splintered bench outside the saloon, hat pulled low, watching the street with the kind of stillness that came from years of waiting for bullets. He'd been in town 3 days, just long enough to know he didn't belong here, and not long enough to care about leaving yet. The whiskey in his flask tasted like rust and regret, which seemed about right. He was 42 years old, looked 50, and felt 100. The war had done that. Not just the fighting, but what came after. The orders that made his stomach turn. The villages. The children's faces. He'd walked away from his commission 2 years back, turned in his uniform, and kept riding west until the mountains swallowed him whole. Red Hollow was just another stop. Another place to rest before the nightmares caught up again. Then he heard the shouting. Caleb's eyes shifted toward the commotion without moving his head. A crowd was gathering in front of Morrison's Supply. Maybe 30 people forming a loose circle. Men mostly, but a few women too, all pressed together like they were watching a dogfight. The energy was wrong, too excited, too eager. He'd seen mobs before. This had that same ugly edge. He should have stayed put, should have finished his drink and found a quiet place to sleep it off. Instead, he stood up. The crowd parted just enough as he approached, bodies shifting with that particular awareness people get when a certain kind of man moves through a space. Caleb wasn't big, average height, lean, with the kind of worn-down frame that came from eating poorly and sleeping rough. But there was something in the way he carried himself, something in his eyes that made men step aside without knowing why. What he saw in the center of that circle stopped him cold. A woman knelt in the dirt, wrist bound behind her back with rough hemp rope that had already rubbed her skin raw. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with long black hair tangled and matted, wearing a torn dress that had once been buckskin but was now so filthy it was hard to tell. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, blood dried at the corner of her mouth. But it was her eyes that hit him hardest. Even kneeling, even beaten, they burned with something fierce and unbroken. She was native. That much was obvious. Also obvious, she was being sold. "Gentlemen, gentlemen!" A man in a fine suit stood beside her, playing to the crowd like a carnival barker. He was tall, well-fed, with slicked back hair and a smile that belonged on a snake. Victor Hale. Caleb had heard the name. Owned the biggest mine operation in 3 counties, ran most of the town through fear and payroll, and apparently had no problem trading in human flesh. "Now I know what you're thinking," Hale continued, pacing in a slow circle around the woman. "Victor, what am I supposed to do with a savage? Can she cook? Can she clean?" He paused for effect, letting the laughter ripple through the crowd. "Can she warm a bed?" More laughter, louder now. A few men elbowed each other, grinning. The woman spat at Hale's feet. The laughter died fast. Hale's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. He crouched down beside her, close enough that she could have bitten him if she wanted. "You see? Spirit. That's what you're buying here, boys, not some broken-down field hand. This one's got fire." He stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Bidding starts at $20. Caleb's jaw tightened. $20. The price of a decent horse. Less than a rifle. "25, someone shouted. 30. 35, and I'll take her tonight." The crowd roared with approval. Hale grinned wider, feeding off the energy like a preacher at a revival. The woman didn't flinch, didn't beg, just stared straight ahead with those burning eyes, like she was already somewhere else, somewhere they couldn't touch. Caleb knew that look. He'd worn it himself. His hand drifted to his belt, fingers brushing the leather pouch where he kept what was left of his savings. $43. Everything he had. He'd been planning to use it for supplies, maybe a train ticket further west when the time came. Enough to disappear properly. He opened his mouth, closed it. This wasn't his fight, wasn't his town. He'd learned the hard way that playing hero got people killed, usually the hero. $40. A fat man in a bowler hat, grinning like Christmas morning. Hale clapped his hands together. 40. Do I hear 45? Silence. The crowd shuffled, waiting. Going once. Caleb's fingers tightened on the pouch. Going twice. Every instinct he'd developed over 2 years of running told him to walk away. Mind his own business. Survive another day. But then the woman's eyes found his through the crowd, and something passed between them. Not hope, exactly, but recognition. Like she saw right through his weathered face and worn-out coat to the truth underneath. He was just as trapped as she was, just in a different kind of cage. $50, Caleb heard himself say. The crowd turned as one, faces swiveling to find the source of the voice. Caleb pushed through, stepping into the circle. Hale's eyes narrowed, sizing him up. Dusty trail clothes, battered hat, a face that had seen too much sun and too little sleep. $50, Caleb repeated, pulling out his pouch and counting out the coins with steady hands. Cash money. Hale's smile shifted, became something sharper. Well now, don't believe I've had the pleasure, friend. You new in Red Hollow? Just passing through. Passing through with $50 to spend on entertainment. Hale's eyes glittered. Must be doing well for yourself. Must be. Caleb met his gaze without blinking. We have a deal or not? For a moment, the whole street seemed to hold its breath. The woman's eyes hadn't left Caleb's face, studying him with an intensity that felt like being searched at gunpoint. Hale stroked his chin, pretending to consider, though they both knew he'd already made up his mind. $50 was $50. Well, Hale said slowly, I hate to disappoint the other bidders, but business is business. He held out his hand. Sold. Caleb counted out the coins one by one, dropping them into Hale's palm with small metallic clinks. Each one felt heavier than it should have. When the last coin fell, Hale closed his fist around them and stepped back, gesturing grandly toward the woman like a magician revealing his final trick. She's all yours, friend. Property transfers as is, no refunds. His smile widened. And if she gives you trouble, well, that's your problem now. The crowd began to disperse, muttering and chuckling, the show over. Caleb knelt beside the woman, reaching for the ropes at her wrists. She jerked back violently, nearly losing her balance. Easy, he said quietly, just cutting you loose. She didn't relax, but she stopped pulling away. Up close, she was even more beaten up than he'd realized. Bruises layered on bruises, cuts half-healed and infected. The kind of damage that came from days or weeks of rough handling. Her breathing was shallow, controlled, waiting. He pulled his knife and sawed through the rope. It fell away in coils. She brought her hands forward slowly, wrists rubbed raw and bleeding. For a long moment, she just stared at them, like she'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. Then she looked at him. Who are you? Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but there was steel underneath. Nobody important, Caleb said. He stood, offering his hand. She ignored it, pushing herself to her feet with visible effort. She was tall, taller than he'd expected, and even half-starved and beaten, she held herself like a warrior. Blood soaked through the dress at her side, an injury he hadn't noticed before. You're hurt. I'm fine. You're bleeding. I said I'm fine. She swayed slightly, caught herself. Pride and pain fought across her face, and pride was losing. Caleb glanced around. The street had mostly emptied, people returning to their business now that the entertainment was over. But Hale was still watching from the porch of Morrison's Supply, flanked by 2 men with rifles. The message was clear. I'm letting you walk away now, but I'm watching. Come on, Caleb said. My horse is this way. Where are you taking me? Somewhere you can sit down before you fall down. She studied him for another long moment, eyes searching his face for whatever truth people looked for in moments like this. Whatever she found there, it was enough. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, and followed him down the street. His horse was tied outside the saloon, a sturdy buckskin mare named Sadie, patient and unflappable. The woman eyed the horse warily but didn't protest when Caleb helped her mount. Her hands shook as she gripped the saddle horn. You got a name? Caleb asked, swinging up behind her. Silence. Then, Ayanna. Caleb Rourke. She didn't respond. He hadn't expected her to. They rode out of Red Hollow as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Caleb kept the pace easy, aware of how Ayanna's body tensed with each jolt of the horse's gait. She didn't complain, didn't make a sound, but he could feel the tremor running through her, shock and exhaustion catching up now that the immediate danger had passed. His cabin was an hour's ride into the hills, tucked into a fold of the mountains where the pine trees grew thick and the nearest neighbor was a day's journey away. It wasn't much. One room, a stone fireplace, a roof that mostly didn't leak, but it was his. The first place he'd stayed longer than a week since leaving the cavalry. Full dark had fallen by the time they arrived. Ayanna slid from the horse before he could help her, landing hard and nearly collapsing. Caleb caught her elbow and she pulled away sharply, breath hissing through her teeth. "Let me look at that wound, Hyum," he said. "No." "You're going to bleed out if—" I said no. She backed toward the cabin wall, eyes wild now, cornered animal wild. "You bought me. Fine. I'm alive because of it. But you don't touch me. Understand?" Caleb raised both hands slowly, stepping back. Understood. They stared at each other in the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "There's bandages inside," Caleb said finally. "Clean water. Whatever you need. I'll be out here with the horse." He turned away, giving her space, giving her time. Behind him, he heard the cabin door open and close. He unsaddled Sadie, brushed her down, gave her water and oats. Took his time with it. When he finally went inside, Ayanna was sitting by the cold fireplace, dress pulled aside, pressing a wadded cloth against the knife wound in her side. Her eyes tracked him across the room, but she didn't speak. Caleb built up the fire, put water on to boil, set out what food he had. Dried meat, hardtack, some beans. Not much, but better than nothing. He worked in silence, letting the routine calm his own jangled nerves. What the hell had he just done? Spent his last dollar on a stranger in a town run by a man who clearly didn't like being challenged. Smart, Caleb. Real smart. But when he glanced at Ayanna, still holding pressure on that wound with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, he couldn't quite make himself regret it. "The water's hot," he said. "There's soap and clean rags on the shelf." "Why did you do it?" The question came out harsh, almost angry. "Why did you buy me?" Caleb considered his answer carefully. The easy lie would be to claim some noble motive, paint himself as a better man than he was, but she'd see through that in a heartbeat. "I don't know," he said honestly. Seemed like the thing to do at the time. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." She watched him for a long moment, then slowly began cleaning the wound. Her hands were steadier now, movements practiced. She'd done this before, probably more than once. "That man," Ayanna said. "Victor Hale. You know who he is?" "I know enough. Owns the mine. Owns most of the town. He owns more than that." She winced as she pressed a clean cloth against the wound. "He owns secrets and people, and he doesn't let go of his property easily. You're not his property anymore." A bitter smile crossed her face. "You really believe that?" Before Caleb could answer, glass shattered. The window exploded inward in a spray of fragments, and something heavy thudded against the far wall. For one frozen instant, Caleb's mind went blank. Then instinct kicked in, cavalry instinct, the kind that kept you alive when the shooting started. He threw himself at Ayanna, knocking her flat as a second shot punched through the door. Wood splintered. The oil lamp on the table shattered, flames spreading across the floor. "Stay down!" Caleb crawled to the wall, staying below the window line. His rifle was by the door, might as well be in the next county. His revolver was closer, hanging on a peg near the fireplace. 3 feet away. Miles. Another shot. This one took out what was left of the window. "How many?" Ayanna's voice was steady despite the blood soaking through her dress. "Don't know. At least 2, probably more." "Hale's men." "Yeah." So Caleb lunged for the revolver, grabbed it, rolled back. 6 shots. Maybe a dozen men outside. The math wasn't good. "There's a back door. When I start shooting, you run. I'm not leaving you. You're hurt and unarmed and I've been fighting longer than you've been riding horses." She grabbed the fire poker, testing its weight. "Back door, right. Where does it lead?" Creek bed, trees, about 50 yards of open ground first. Perfect. Her smile was all teeth. We'll die together then. Caleb almost laughed. Would have if bullets weren't currently turning his cabin into kindling. You always this stubborn? You always this stupid? A voice called from outside, rough and mocking. Rourke! You in there? Mr. Hale wants a word. Caleb didn't answer. He was counting muzzle flashes, trying to map positions. 2 at the front, 1 by the big pine, 1 behind the water trough. At least 1 more around the side based on the angle of that last shot. Probably men at the back too, covering the escape route. He says you got something belongs to him, the voice continued. Says he'll pay double what you gave him. How's $100 sound? You can walk away rich, Rourke. All you gotta do is be smart. I'm fresh out of smart, Caleb muttered. Ayanna shifted beside him, eyes bright in the firelight. The flames from the broken lamp were spreading, catching on the dry floorboards. Soon this whole place would be an oven. Listen to me, she said quietly. There's a canyon 3 miles north. Red rocks, shaped like a split tooth. My people, some of them, they camp there sometimes. If we can make it that far, if, she met his eyes. But I'd rather die running than die in a cage. Caleb thought about that. Thought about all the times he'd chosen the safe play, the smart play, the play that kept him alive another day. Thought about where it had gotten him, alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, haunted by ghosts and regrets, with nothing to show for 42 years of living except scars and nightmares. Mr. Rourke, the voice again. Running out of patience here. Then run out, Caleb called back. He looked at Ayanna. 3 miles? 3 miles. Your people friendly? To me? Yes, to you? She shrugged. Probably not, but less likely to shoot you than these men. Good enough. He thumbed back the hammer on his revolver. On 3. 1. The front door exploded inward. 2 men rushed through, rifles raised. Caleb fired twice, fast, center mass. Both men went down hard. He was moving before they hit the floor, grabbing Ayanna's arm and hauling her toward the back door as the night erupted in gunfire. They burst into the open air and ran. Bullets kicked up dirt at their heels. Ayanna was fast despite the wound, faster than she had any right to be. Caleb fired behind them without looking, just buying seconds. The creek bed was ahead, dark and promising. 20 yards. 15. 10. Ayanna stumbled. Caleb caught her, half-dragged her the last few feet, and they tumbled down the embankment together in a tangle of limbs and pain. Water soaked through his clothes, cold and shocking. Above them, boots pounded, men shouting. Where are they? Lost them in the dark. Spread out. They can't have gone far. Caleb and Ayanna pressed flat against the creek bank, water flowing around them, breath ragged. The cold was already seeping into his bones. Ayanna's face was pale, lips tinged blue. The wound at her side was bleeding again, fresh blood mixing with creek water. Can you walk? He whispered. Can you shut up? He almost smiled. Almost. They waited. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually the voices faded, moving away down the creek. Caleb counted to 100, then 100 more. When he was reasonably sure they weren't about to get their heads blown off, he touched Ayanna's shoulder. We need to move. You're freezing. So are you. I'm not bleeding. Fair point. She let him help her up, though it cost her visible effort. North! Follow the water until we hit the big rocks. They walked through the darkness, Ayanna leaning heavily on his shoulder, both of them soaked and shivering. Behind them, Caleb's cabin burned, orange flames visible through the trees. Everything he owned, gone. Just like that. He should have felt something about it. Anger, maybe. Loss. But all he felt was a strange, hollow relief. Like a weight he'd been carrying had finally been set down. You know, Ayanna said, voice tight with pain, most men who buy women in Red Hollow don't end up burning their homes down the same night. I like to be memorable. You succeeded. They stumbled on through the night, hunted and freezing, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a revolver with 3 rounds left. Somewhere ahead was a canyon full of people who might help or might kill them. Somewhere behind was Hale and his men, and a town that would call this justice. And despite everything, the cold, the pain, the absolute certainty that he'd just made the worst decision of his life, Caleb Rourke felt more alive than he had in 2 years. 3 miles, he said. 3 miles, Ayanna agreed. They walked north toward the red rocks, toward whatever came next. The night was long and dark, but somewhere ahead, dawn was waiting. Dawn came slow and grudging, the sky turning from black to charcoal to a pale, sickly gray that did nothing to warm the air. Caleb's clothes had frozen to his skin during the night, each step cracking the ice that had formed in the fabric. Beside him, Ayanna moved like a ghost, silent and steady, despite the blood that still seeped through the makeshift bandage he'd tied around her ribs with a strip torn from his shirt. They'd been walking for hours, maybe 5, maybe 6. Time lost meaning when you were cold enough that your thoughts slowed to a crawl and every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. How much further? Caleb's voice came out rough, barely recognizable. Ayanna didn't answer right away. She was staring ahead, eyes scanning the landscape with an intensity that suggested she was looking for something specific. The terrain had changed over the past mile, the pine forest giving way to rocky outcroppings, the ground rising in a series of jagged shelves that made walking treacherous. There, she said finally, pointing. Caleb followed her gaze and saw it, a massive formation of red stone rising from the earth like a broken tooth, exactly as she'd described. The canyon walls stretched up maybe 200 feet, creating a natural corridor that disappeared into shadow. No smoke, no signs of life, just rock and silence. You sure they're here? No. Ayanna started forward, stumbling slightly. Caleb caught her arm and she didn't pull away this time, which told him more about her condition than any complaint would have. But if they're not, we're dead anyway, so it doesn't much matter. Hard to argue with that logic. They picked their way through the rocks, boots slipping on patches of ice. The canyon entrance loomed ahead, dark and uninviting. Caleb's hand drifted to his revolver, 3 shots left, and he'd be damned lucky if his frozen fingers could pull the trigger. Not exactly a strong negotiating position. When we get in there, Ayanna said quietly, let me do the talking. I wasn't planning on making a speech. I'm serious. These people, my people, they have reasons to hate white men. Good reasons. You understand? Yeah. Caleb had seen enough massacred villages to understand just fine. I'll keep my mouth shut. Thank you. They entered the canyon. The walls rose on either side, blocking out what little light the morning offered. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, or at least it felt that way. Caleb's teeth were chattering so hard he thought they might crack. Beside him, Ayanna's breathing had gone shallow and rapid. Shock, blood loss, hypothermia, probably all 3. Then he saw the first one. A figure stepped from behind a boulder 30 feet ahead. So suddenly, it was like they'd materialized from the rock itself. A man, lean and hard-faced, wearing buckskin and carrying a rifle that looked older than Caleb, but probably shot just fine. His eyes were black and cold as the stones around them. Ayanna. His voice was flat, giving nothing away. Dakota. She straightened, trying to look stronger than she was. Failing. I need to speak with the elders. The elders don't want to speak with you. His gaze shifted to Caleb, and the temperature in the canyon seemed to drop another 20 degrees, especially not when you bring soldiers into our refuge. He's not a soldier. He carries himself like one. He smells like one. Dakota's grip tightened on the rifle. We should kill him now and be done with it. You could try, Caleb said, then immediately regretted it when Ayanna shot him a look that could have melted the ice off his coat. Dakota's expression didn't change. Is that a challenge? It's a fact. You've got one rifle, I've got a revolver. We're both freezing, and you look about as eager to die this morning as I am. Caleb kept his hand away from his gun, making the point clear. He wasn't looking for a fight, just stating reality. How about we skip the part where we kill each other and get to the part where somebody builds a fire before your friend here bleeds out? For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dakota's eyes went to Ayanna, really seeing her for the first time. The blood, the pallor, the way she was holding herself together through sheer stubbornness. What happened? Hale! The name came out like a curse. He had me in Red Hollow. This one bought me. Hale sent men after us. How many men? Enough. Ayanna swayed, caught herself. Dakota, please. I have information about the mine, about what they're doing to the sacred lands. But if I die before I can tell it—" She didn't finish the sentence. Her eyes rolled back and her knees buckled. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, taking her full weight. She was lighter than she should have been, all bone and gristle, with nothing soft left. Dakota stepped forward, then stopped, conflict playing across his face. "You shouldn't have brought him here." "Well, she didn't have a lot of options," Caleb snapped. His patience was wearing thin, along with his ability to feel his feet. "You want to help, or you want to stand there being judgmental? Because I can carry her further if I have to, but I'd rather not." Something in Dakota's expression shifted. Not quite approval, but maybe recognition. Like he saw something in Caleb he hadn't expected to find. He whistled, sharp and piercing, and two more figures emerged from the rocks. A woman and a younger man, both armed, both watching Caleb like he was a snake that might strike. "Bring them," Dakota said. "But if he makes one wrong move—" Yeah, you'll kill me. Got it." Caleb adjusted his grip on Ayanna, who was completely unconscious now. "Let's go." They followed Dakota deeper into the canyon. The path twisted and turned, probably designed to confuse anyone who didn't know the way. After 10 minutes of walking, the canyon opened into a wider space where maybe 20 structures were built into the rock face, a mix of traditional dwellings and makeshift shelters, all hidden so well you could walk right past without seeing them. People emerged from the shadows. Women, children, old men, a few younger warriors, all watching, all silent. The weight of their stares pressed on Caleb like physical force. Dakota led them to one of the larger dwellings, ducking through the low entrance. Inside was warmer, a fire burning in a central pit, the smoke rising through a natural chimney in the rock. An old woman sat by the fire, grinding something in a stone bowl. She looked up as they entered, her eyes sharp despite the wrinkles carved deep into her face. "Grandmother," Dakota said. "Ayanna has returned." The old woman's eyes went to the unconscious girl in Caleb's arms, then to Caleb himself. "Put her down." Caleb lowered Ayanna onto a pile of furs near the fire. The old woman moved with surprising speed, already pulling away the blood-soaked bandage, examining the wound with practiced hands. "Knife wound," she said. 3 days old, maybe 4. Infected." Her eyes found Caleb's again. "You do this?" "No, ma'am." "But you were there when it happened." "No, ma'am." "Found her like this. Bought her off the man who did it or had it done." "Bought her?" The old woman's voice was flat. "Like you would buy a horse." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "Yes, ma'am. Exactly like that. And if I could go back and do it different, I would. But I can't, so here we are." The old woman stared at him for a long moment, then returned her attention to Ayanna. "Dakota, bring me water, clean cloth, the medicine pouch with the red beads." She glanced at Caleb. "You, sit down before you fall down. You're no use to anyone dead." Caleb wanted to argue, but his legs made the decision for him. He collapsed onto the floor near the fire, feeling starting to return to his extremities in sharp, painful pulses. Dakota brought the supplies, then stationed himself by the entrance, rifle across his knees, watching Caleb with undisguised suspicion. The old woman worked in silence, cleaning the wound, packing it with herbs that smelled sharp and medicinal, wrapping it with fresh cloth. Ayanna stirred once, moaning, but didn't wake. When the old woman was satisfied, she covered the girl with more furs and turned to Caleb. "Take off your coat." "I'm fine." "You have frostbite on 3 fingers and both ears. Take off your coat, or I'll have Dakota do it for you." Caleb looked at Dakota, who smiled grimly and stood up. "Fine," Caleb muttered, shrugging out of his frozen coat. The old woman examined his hands with the same clinical efficiency she'd shown Ayanna, making disapproving noises. "You'll keep the fingers," she said finally. "The ears too, probably. But you'll hurt for a while." She handed him a clay cup filled with something hot and bitter. "Drink." He drank. It tasted like dirt and fire and something else he couldn't identify, but warmth spread through his chest almost immediately. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. We haven't decided whether to let you live." She wasn't joking. Caleb could see it in her eyes, in the set of Dakota's shoulders, in the faces of the people who kept peering through the entrance to stare at him. He was being tolerated, not accepted. The second Ayanna woke up and told her story, or didn't wake up at all, that tolerance would end. Fair enough, he said. The old woman settled back by the fire, resuming her grinding. For a while, the only sounds were the crackling flames and the rhythmic scrape of stone on stone. Then, without looking up, she spoke. My name is Kuanyaoma. I am the elder of this clan, what's left of it. She gestured at Dakota. This is my grandson. The girl you carried here is my granddaughter's daughter. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You're saying she's family, that I'd better not have hurt her. I'm saying you've brought danger to people who've already lost everything. Our lands, our homes, our dead buried in ground that's now being torn apart for gold that we never wanted. Her hands never stopped moving, grinding whatever was in the bowl to powder. So before I decide your fate, I need to know. Who are you, and why should I believe anything you say? Caleb considered lying. He'd gotten good at it over the years, good at being whoever people needed him to be. But something about Kuanyama's eyes made dishonesty seem pointless. Name's Caleb Rourke. Used to be Captain Caleb Rourke, 4th Cavalry, until I quit. Spent the last 2 years trying to forget things I did in uniform, things I was ordered to do. He stared at the fire, seeing different fires, different faces. Saw your granddaughter being sold like property in Red Hollow. Couldn't walk away. So I bought her, which was stupid, and then Hale sent men to take her back, which I expected. Burned down my cabin getting her out. And now we're here. Why couldn't you walk away? Don't know. Wish I did. Kuanyama was quiet for a moment. You said you did things in uniform. What things? Things you already know about. Villages, crops burned, people moved off their land at gunpoint. He met her eyes. I followed orders. That's what soldiers do. And then one day I looked at the orders and realized I couldn't anymore. So I quit. And that makes you better, quitting after the damage is done? No, ma'am. It makes me a coward who finally grew a conscience too late to matter. Something flickered in Kuanyama's expression. Not forgiveness, but maybe understanding. At least you know what you are. Small comfort. Better than none. She poured the powder from the bowl into a leather pouch, tied it closed with practiced fingers. Ayana will sleep through the day and most of the night. When she wakes, she'll tell me her story. If it matches yours, you may stay until you're strong enough to leave. If it doesn't, she didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Understood. Dakota will show you where you can rest. Don't wander. Don't touch anything. Don't speak to anyone unless they speak to you first. Yes, ma'am. Dakota jerked his head toward the entrance. Caleb stood, every muscle screaming, and followed him out into the canyon. The people who'd been watching scattered like birds, disappearing into dwellings and shadows. Only a few children remained staring with open curiosity until their mothers pulled them away. Dakota led him to a small shelter at the far end of the encampment, barely more than a hole carved into the rock face with a canvas tarp for a door. You sleep here. Someone will bring you food. Don't come out unless you're called. That an order or a suggestion? It's the only thing keeping you alive right now. Dakota's expression was hard as the stone around them. You seem like you might not be the worst white man I've met. But that's a low bar, and you haven't cleared it yet. Ayana is beloved here. If she dies, I get it. You'll kill me. Slowly. Dakota turned to leave, then stopped. She talked about you, while you were carrying her. Delirious, fevered, but she talked. Caleb waited. She said you could have run. Left her in Red Hollow, left her at your cabin, left her in the creek. Every time you could have saved yourself, you didn't. Dakota's eyes were unreadable. I don't know if that makes you brave or stupid, but I thought you should know she noticed. He walked away before Caleb could respond, leaving him alone with the wind and the weight of too many thoughts. Caleb pushed through the canvas tarp into the shelter. It was dark, cold, barely big enough to stretch out in. A single blanket lay folded in the corner, rough wool that smelled like wood smoke. It was the best bed he'd had in months. He wrapped himself in the blanket and lay down, feeling every bruise, every cut, every frozen joint. His mind was spinning too fast to sleep, thinking about Hale's men searching the woods, about his burned cabin, about the look in Ayana's eyes when she'd told him to run. But eventually, exhaustion won. He dropped into a black, dreamless sleep that felt like drowning. When he woke, the light filtering through the tarp had changed, gone golden and slanted. Late afternoon, maybe early evening. His body felt like it had been beaten with hammers. But at least he could feel it. That was progress. He pushed himself upright and immediately regretted it as the world tilted sideways. Steady, he told himself. Take it slow. He'd been hypothermic before, knew the recovery was almost as bad as the freezing itself. The canvas tarp pushed aside and a boy appeared, maybe 10 years old, carrying a wooden bowl. He stared at Caleb with huge, solemn eyes. Kuanyama says you need to eat. Tell her thank you. The boy didn't move, just kept staring. Finally he said, Are you really a soldier? Was. Not anymore. Did you kill people? Yeah. How many? Caleb took the bowl, some kind of stew, still steaming, and met the boy's eyes. Too many to count, too many to forget. The boy thought about that. My father was killed by soldiers 2 winters ago. They came to our village and said we had to leave. He said no. They shot him. The stew turned to ash in Caleb's mouth. I'm sorry. Were you there? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. What else could he say? The truth was worse than any lie. If I was, I'm sorry. If I wasn't, I'm sorry anyway. Doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry. The boy nodded slowly, like this made sense to him in a way it probably shouldn't have to a 10-year-old. Kuanyama says sometimes the bad thing someone did yesterday isn't the thing they do tomorrow. She says people can change if they want to. Your Kuanyama is wiser than I am. Everyone is wiser than you. You let Hale's men burn your house. The boy almost smiled. That was stupid. Despite everything, Caleb laughed. It hurt, but it felt good. Yeah, it really was. The boy left him to his stew. Caleb ate slowly, forcing down the food, even though he had no appetite. He needed the strength. Whatever was coming next, he'd need to be ready. Full dark had fallen by the time Dakota appeared again. Kuanyama wants to see you. Caleb followed him through the encampment, aware of eyes watching from every shadow. The fire in Kuanyama's dwelling had been built up, casting dancing shadows on the rock walls. Ayana was awake, propped against the firs, her face still pale, but her eyes clear and sharp. She looked at him, and something complicated passed across her face. You're alive. So are you. Seems we both got lucky. She shifted, wincing at the movement. Kuanyama tells me you've been a perfect guest. Quiet, obedient, no trouble at all. That's me. Model citizen. Kuanyama made a sound that might have been amusement. Sit down, Rourke. We have things to discuss. Caleb sat. Dakota remained standing by the entrance, arms crossed, still watching like Caleb might sprout horns at any moment. I told them everything, Ayana said. About Red Hollow, about Hale, about what I saw before they captured me. What did you see? She exchanged a look with Kuanyama, some silent communication passing between them. Then she took a breath and started talking. 3 weeks ago, I was scouting the old territories, the lands that were promised to us in the treaty, the ones we were forced to abandon when they found gold. I wanted to see what they'd done to it, how bad the damage was. Her voice was steady, but anger burned underneath. It's worse than you can imagine. The whole valley looks like it's been torn apart by demons. Trees gone, streams poisoned, earth ripped open. But that's not the worst part. She paused, gathering herself. I found graves. Mass graves. Fresh ones. Her eyes locked on Caleb's. The people who wouldn't leave, the ones who said this was sacred land, who refused to be moved again. They're all dead. Men, women, children, buried in pits and covered with lime. The temperature in the dwelling seemed to drop. Caleb felt something cold and familiar settle in his gut, the same feeling he'd gotten standing over burned villages, looking at bodies that didn't need to be bodies. How many? I counted markers for 63. Could be more. Ayana's hands clenched on the firs. Hale's operation isn't just illegal mining, it's genocide. And he has the local government in his pocket. The sheriff, the judge, probably the territorial governor. Anyone who could stop him is either bought or dead. And he caught you while you were documenting this, Caleb said. I got careless, stayed too long, took too many risks. His men ambushed me near the 3rd grave site, killed my horse, dragged me back to Red Hollow. Her jaw tightened. They wanted to know if I'd told anyone what I saw, who I'd talked to, where the rest of my people were hiding. I didn't tell them, so they beat me. And when that didn't work, Hale decided to make an example. Sell me in the street like an animal, Show everyone what happens when you cross him. Silence filled the dwelling, heavy and suffocating. You have proof? Caleb asked. Evidence? I kept a journal. Drawings, notes, locations, everything I could document. She looked at Kuanyoma. It was hidden in my saddlebag. When they killed my horse, it's gone, Kuanyoma finished, which means the only evidence is me, my word against Hale's. Ayana's laugh was bitter. And who's going to believe a savage over a respectable businessman? She had a point. Caleb had seen how these things went. Men like Hale didn't get arrested, they got richer. Men like Hale didn't face justice, they bought it. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, they made mistakes. What if we could get more evidence? Caleb said slowly. Not just your word. Physical proof. Documents, maybe. Something that would tie Hale directly to the killings. Dakota snorted. And how exactly would we do that? Walk into his office and ask nicely? Actually, Caleb's mind was turning now, falling back into old patterns. Tactical planning, asset assessment, risk calculation. That's not the worst idea. Everyone stared at him. You've lost your mind, Ayana said flatly. Probably, but hear me out. He leaned forward, warming to the idea. Hale thinks I'm dead or running. He thinks you're dead or captured. He's won, as far as he knows, which means he's not worried about covering his tracks right now. His office in Red Hollow, there have to be records there. Ledgers, correspondence, something that proves what he's doing. Even if that's true, Kiyu, Kuanyama said, you'd never get in. The building is guarded. The whole town works for him. Not the whole town, just most of it. Caleb thought about the people he'd seen in Red Hollow, the shopkeepers, the farmers, the ordinary folks who kept their heads down and tried to survive. There are always people who hate the tyrant. They're just too scared to say it out loud. You're talking about starting a war, Dakota said. No, I'm talking about ending one. Hale's been waging war on your people for years. All I'm suggesting is we hit back. Smart, surgical. Get the evidence. Get it to someone who matters. A federal marshal, a territorial judge who isn't bought, a newspaper back east. Make it impossible to ignore. And then what? Ayana's voice was sharp. Even if we expose him, even if we prove everything, you think that saves us? You think the government will suddenly care about dead natives and stolen land? No, Caleb said honestly. But it might save the ones who aren't dead yet. And it might put Hale in a noose, which wouldn't fix anything but would feel pretty good. Ayana stared at him for a long moment, then started laughing. It was a hard, painful sound, but genuine. You really are crazy. That's been established. It's a suicide mission. Probably. We'd need help. People who know the town, know the building layout, know Hale's routines. Yes. We'd need weapons, supplies, horses, a plan that doesn't get everyone killed in the first 5 minutes. Also, yes. She looked at Kuanyoma, then at Dakota, then back at Caleb. Something fierce and desperate burned in her eyes. The look of someone who'd been beaten down so many times that one more beating didn't matter anymore, because at least this time she'd go down swinging. When do we start? Kuanyama held up a hand. Wait. Both of you, wait. She fixed Caleb with a stare that could have drilled holes through stone. You understand what you're proposing? This isn't some cavalry raid where you follow orders and let command take the blame. This is personal. This is choosing to stand against a powerful man who will hunt you until one of you is dead. Are you truly prepared for that? Caleb thought about his cabin, burning, about the last 2 years running from ghosts, about the boy whose father was shot for saying no, about Ayana kneeling in the dirt with a price tag around her neck. I spent most of my life following orders I knew were wrong, he said quietly, and then I spent 2 years doing nothing because I was too tired and too broken to care about anything. But I'm here now, and for the first time since I can remember, I actually give a damn about something. So yeah, I'm prepared. Kuanyama studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, she nodded. Dakota, gather the warriors, everyone old enough to hold a weapon. She looked at Ayana. You have 3 days to heal. Use them wisely. 3 days? Ayana protested. I can be ready in 3 days, Kuanyama said firmly. You're no good to anyone dead. Rest. Eat. Let me teach you what I know about staying alive long enough to make a difference. Her eyes shifted to Caleb. And you? You say you were cavalry. Prove it. These people need training, real training, not just anger and desperation. Yes, ma'am. And Rourke? She waited until he met her eyes. If you get my granddaughter's daughter killed, I will personally ensure you suffer for it. Clear? Crystal. She waved them out. Caleb and Ayanna left together, stepping into the cold night air. The stars were out, hard and bright against the black sky. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called. You meant that, Ayanna said, about giving a damn. Surprised me too. You know we're probably going to die, right? Yeah. Good, just making sure we're on the same page. She started toward her dwelling, then stopped. Rourke? Yeah? Thank you for buying me, for not leaving me, for being stupid enough to think we can actually win this. She smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look young and fierce and absolutely terrifying. I'm glad you're crazy. Me too, Caleb said. She disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone with the stars and the night and the growing certainty that he'd just committed to the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. And the strange part was, he wasn't sorry. 3 days. They had 3 days to turn a handful of survivors into something that could fight back. 3 days to plan an assault on a man who owned a town. 3 days to find proof of crimes that powerful people wanted buried. 3 days to make a difference, or die trying. Caleb looked up at the stars and allowed himself one small, grim smile. He'd had worse odds before. The first day, Caleb woke to find Dakota standing over him with a rifle pointed at his chest. Get up, Dakota said. If you're going to train warriors, I need to know you can still fight. Caleb blinked sleep from his eyes, his body protesting every movement. What time is it? Early enough that nobody will see me kill you if you're lying about your skills. Comforting. Caleb pushed himself up, joints cracking. Outside the shelter, the sky was still dark, stars fading into pre-dawn gray. What did you have in mind? Dakota tossed him a knife. Show me what cavalry taught you about close quarters. They moved to a flat section of the canyon floor, away from the dwellings. The ground was hard-packed dirt and stone, treacherous in the dim light. Caleb tested the knife's weight, found it balanced well enough. Dakota drew his own blade, a wicked-looking thing with a bone handle. First blood? Caleb asked. First yield. Dakota's smile was sharp. Unless you'd prefer otherwise. They circled each other, both moving carefully. Dakota was younger, faster, angrier. Caleb was older, tired, carrying injuries from the creek and the cold. Not a fair fight, which was probably the point. Dakota wanted to see how he handled unfair. Dakota struck first, a quick slash aimed at Caleb's ribs. Caleb twisted away, barely, feeling the blade whisper past his shirt. He countered with a low thrust that Dakota knocked aside easily. They separated, circled again. You're slow, Dakota said. You're impatient. Dakota came in hard, a combination of strikes that forced Caleb backward. The younger man was good, better than good, moving with the kind of fluid precision that came from a lifetime of practice. Caleb blocked, dodged, gave ground, waiting for the opening. It came when Dakota overextended on a high slash. Caleb dropped under it, swept Dakota's lead leg, and put him on his back. Before Dakota could recover, Caleb had the knife at his throat. Yield, Caleb said, breathing hard. Dakota stared up at him, fury and something else, maybe respect, flickering in his eyes. I yield. Caleb stepped back, offering a hand. After a moment's hesitation, Dakota took it, letting himself be pulled upright. He sheathed his knife, studying Caleb with new intensity. You fought dirty. I fought smart. There's a difference. Caleb returned the borrowed knife. Dirty is using tricks to win when you don't need them. Smart is doing whatever it takes to stay alive when the other guy wants you dead. Your people are going to be outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting men who won't hesitate to kill them. Dirty is the only way they survive. Dakota absorbed this, then nodded slowly. Show me. So Caleb showed him. For the next 3 hours, as the sun climbed and the canyon warmed, he ran Dakota through every underhanded, brutal, unfair technique he'd learned in 20 years of warfare. How to use terrain as a weapon. How to strike from shadow and disappear before retaliation came. How to make noise in one direction while attacking from another. How to kill quickly and quietly, because sometimes that was the only mercy you could offer. By the time they finished, both men were soaked in sweat despite the cold. Takota's earlier hostility had shifted into something harder to define. Not quite friendship, but working respect. "The others need to see this," Takota said. "All of it." "Then gather them." Word spread fast through the small encampment. By midday, Caleb had 15 people assembled in a sheltered area of the canyon, men and women ranging from teenagers to grizzled veterans who'd survived more winters than Caleb had years, all of them armed with a mix of rifles, bows, knives, and improvised weapons, all of them watching him with varying degrees of suspicion. Ayana was there too, against Kuwanyama's explicit orders, sitting on a rock with her side bandaged and her eyes sharp as broken glass. "Most of you hate me," Caleb started without preamble. "That's fine. I'd hate me too. But we don't have time for hate right now, and we don't have time for trust. What we have is 3 days to get ready for a fight that'll probably kill us all. So here's how this works. You do exactly what I say, when I say it, or you leave. Questions?" A woman in the back raised her hand. She was maybe 30, hard-faced, with a scar running from her temple to her jaw. "Why should we listen to a soldier? The last soldiers we met killed half our village. Because I know how soldiers think. I know their tactics, their weaknesses, their training. And I know that Hale's men aren't real soldiers. They're hired guns, thugs with weapons who've never faced anyone who fights back smart." Caleb met her eyes. "You want revenge? Learn from me. You want justice? Learn from me. You want to die pointlessly? Keep doing things the way you've been doing them." The woman stared at him for a long moment, then sat back down. "Good. We'll start with formations." He worked them hard, not just teaching techniques, but breaking bad habits, the kind that got people killed. Most of them were natural fighters, born from necessity, but they fought alone, each person an island. Caleb needed them working as a unit, covering each other, moving like a single organism with many parts. It was brutal work. People made mistakes, got frustrated, snapped at each other. Twice, Caleb had to separate fighters before they came to blows. But slowly, grudgingly, they started to improve, started to move together, started to look less like desperate refugees and more like something dangerous. Ayana watched it all from her rock, offering occasional comments that were always sharp and usually right. Around mid-afternoon, she called out, "You're babying them." Caleb paused in the middle of demonstrating a flanking maneuver. "Excuse me? You heard me. You're going easy because you think they're fragile." She pushed herself up, wincing. "These people have survived things that would break you twice over. Stop treating them like recruits and start treating them like warriors." "You should be resting." "I'll rest when I'm dead." She limped into the training area, addressing the assembled fighters. "He's right about one thing. We need to work together. But he's wrong about going easy. Hale's men won't pull their punches. They'll shoot to kill, and they'll laugh while doing it." Her eyes swept the group. "So from now on, we train like we're already dying. Every mistake costs a life. Every hesitation gets someone killed. Anyone not ready for that can leave now." Nobody moved. "Then let's actually fight." What followed was the most vicious training session Caleb had ever witnessed. Ayana drove them relentlessly, pushing past exhaustion into something primal and fierce. She paired them off, had them fight at full speed with dulled weapons, no holding back. When someone went down, she made them get back up. When someone complained, she told them to save it for their funeral. And the thing was, it worked. By sunset, the group had transformed. They moved with purpose now, with coordination, with the kind of deadly intent that came from knowing exactly what they were fighting for. "Better," Caleb said when they finally stopped. "Still not good enough," Ayana replied. But she was smiling. Then she swayed and Caleb caught her before she fell. "That's it, you're done for today." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding through your bandage and you can barely stand. If Kuwanyama sees you like this, she'll kill both of us." He guided her back toward her dwelling, feeling her lean heavily on him despite her protests. "You can be stubborn tomorrow." "I'm stubborn every day." "I've noticed." He got her settled back in Kuwanyama's dwelling, where the old woman took one look at the fresh blood and launched into a tirade in her own language that needed no translation. Ayana endured it silently, jaw set, while Kuwanyama changed the bandages with rough efficiency. "You have the good sense of a rock," Kuwanyama said when she switched back to English. "Both of you, running around like children when there's actual work to be done." "We're preparing to fight," Ayana protested. "You're preparing to die if you tear this wound open any worse." 3 days, I said. 3 days to heal. That means healing, not playing warrior. She jabbed a finger at Caleb. "And you're supposed to be the one with military training. Didn't they teach you not to let wounded soldiers fight?" "They also taught me not to argue with angry women, ma'am." Kuwanyama's glare could have melted iron, but something that might have been amusement flickered behind it. "Get out. Both of you make my head hurt." Outside, the stars were coming out again, sharp and cold. Caleb walked Ayana to her dwelling, neither of them speaking. At her entrance, she stopped. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not undermining me in front of the others. You weren't wrong. I was going easy on them. I know, but most men wouldn't have admitted that, especially not in front of people who already don't trust them." She studied his face in the starlight. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Another soldier, another man who sees what he wants to see and ignores the rest." She shrugged carefully. "But you actually look, you actually listen. That's rare. Seems like the minimum requirement for being human. You'd be surprised how many people don't meet it." She turned to go inside, then paused. "The plan you mentioned, getting evidence from Hale's office. You really think we can pull it off?" "Honestly, I have no idea, but I've been thinking about it, and I might have something." "Så säger det mesta. Tell me." So he told her what had been forming in his mind since the previous night. Not a perfect plan. There was no such thing, but something that might work if they got lucky and Hale stayed arrogant. Ayana listened without interrupting, her expression growing thoughtful. "That could work," she said when he finished, "or it could get us all killed. Probably both." "When do we tell the others?" "Tomorrow, after another day of training, once they're ready to hear it without panicking." "You think they'll panic?" "I think they're smart enough to know how dangerous this is. But panic won't help anyone, so we wait until they're confident enough to be scared and still fight anyway." Ayana nodded slowly. "You know, for a man who claims to be running from his past, you're pretty good at leading people into danger." "Old habits," Caleb said. "Hard to break." He left her there and made his way back to his own shelter, bone-tired and aching in places he'd forgotten existed. But for the first time in 2 years, the exhaustion felt earned rather than endless. He was doing something, making a choice. It terrified him, but it also felt right in a way nothing had since he turned in his uniform. The second day started the same way. Dakota waking him before dawn, another test, this one involving tracking and stealth. Then more training with the full group building on what they'd learned. By afternoon, they were running coordinated exercises, moving through the canyon like shadows, setting up ambushes and counter-ambushes with growing efficiency. Caleb pulled Dakota aside during a break. "We need to talk about weapons. We have weapons. You have hunting rifles and bows, good for hunting, not enough for what we're planning." Caleb kept his voice low. "Hale's men will have repeaters, shotguns, probably a few heavy rifles. We go in with what you have now, we're dead before we fire a shot." Dakota's jaw tightened. "So what do you suggest? Ask Hale nicely to loan us better guns?" "No, I suggest we take them." Caleb had been working this out in his head all morning. "There's a supply depot outside Red Hollow. Small place, lightly guarded. They store equipment for the mine, powder, tools, and weapons for the security force. We hit it tonight, grab what we need, disappear before anyone knows we were there." "That's insane. That's necessary. Look, we can do this smart. Small team, in and out fast. You, me, maybe 2 others. Everyone else stays here, keeps training." Caleb met Dakota's eyes. "I know it's a risk, but so is going up against Hale's men with inadequate firepower." Dakota was quiet for a long moment, working through the angles. Finally he said, "I'll need to ask Kuwanyama." "Ask her, but make it fast. We move tonight or not at all." Kuwanyama's response was exactly what Caleb expected. A string of objections delivered in 2 languages, followed by grudging acceptance when she realized he was right about the weapons. She insisted on choosing the team herself. Dakota, the scarred woman named Mika who challenged Caleb on the first day, and a young man called Neshoba, who moved like smoke and never seemed to make a sound. Ayana stays here, Kwanyama said firmly when Ayana tried to volunteer. Don't even argue. For once, Ayana didn't. She looked like she wanted to, but the pain and exhaustion won out. She settled for pulling Caleb aside before they left. Don't die stupidly, she said. I'll try to die smart if it comes to that. Not funny. Her hand gripped his arm, surprisingly strong. I mean it, Rourke. We need you. This whole thing falls apart without someone who knows how to fight soldiers. You're assuming I know what I'm doing. You got us this far. Her eyes were serious. Just come back, all right? I don't want to explain to Kwanyama that I let you get killed before we even reached Hale. I'll do my best. They left as the sun set, 4 shadows slipping out of the canyon and into the darkening wilderness. Neshoba led the way, following paths that seemed to exist only in his head, never hesitating even when the terrain became treacherous. Dakota and Mika flanked, weapons ready, eyes scanning. Caleb brought up the rear, old instincts kicking in, watching their back trail for any sign of pursuit. The depot was exactly where Caleb remembered it from his scouting of Red Hollow, a squat wooden building with a corrugated metal roof sitting at the end of a dirt road about 2 miles from town. A single guard stood outside, smoking a cigarette and looking bored. They observed from a distance, hidden in the scrub. Caleb counted windows, doors, sight lines. 1 guard outside, probably 1 or 2 more inside. Routine patrol, no sense of urgency. They had no idea anyone was coming. How do you want to do this? Dakota whispered. Quiet. Neshoba, you're the fastest. Can you take the outside guard without noise? Neshoba nodded once. Good. When he's down, Mika and I go through the front. Dakota, you cover the back in case anyone runs. We subdue anyone inside, grab rifles and ammunition, get out. 5 minutes, start to finish. And if something goes wrong, Mika asked, then we improvise and try not to die. Caleb looked at each of them. Everyone clear? They nodded. Then let's move. Neshoba disappeared into the darkness like he'd never been there. Caleb counted to 30, watching the guard. The man finished his cigarette, flicked it away, reached for another. Then Neshoba materialized behind him, one hand clamping over the guard's mouth, the other bringing a rock down hard on his skull. The guard dropped without a sound. Caleb and Mika moved. They crossed the open ground fast and low, reaching the door as Neshoba dragged the unconscious guard into the shadows. Caleb tested the handle. Unlocked, because why would they lock it out here in the middle of nowhere, and pushed it open. 2 men inside, both sitting at a makeshift table playing cards. They looked up in surprise as Caleb and Mika burst through. One reached for a rifle leaning against the wall. Mika was faster, slamming into him and driving him to the ground. Caleb leveled his revolver at the second man. Don't, Caleb said quietly. The man froze, hands half raised. Smart. Caleb gestured with the gun. Face down on the floor, hands behind your head. Now. The man complied. Mika had her target pinned, one knee on his back, knife at his throat. This one's secure. Good. Tie them both. Caleb scanned the room while Mika worked. The depot was larger inside than it looked. Shelves stacked with supplies, rope, tools, blasting powder, and yes, weapons. Maybe a dozen rifles, various makes and models, along with crates of ammunition. Jackpot. Dakota appeared in the back door. Clear outside. We alone? For now. Help me with these rifles. They worked fast, grabbing weapons and ammunition, loading everything into canvas sacks they found on the shelves. Caleb selected carefully, repeating rifles when possible, good condition, reliable mechanisms. Nothing fancy, but solid working firearms that would give them a fighting chance. Got what we need? Dakota asked. Enough. Well, Caleb glanced at the bound men on the floor. They were staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. He recognized that look, the look of men who expected to die and were waiting for the bullet. He lowered his revolver. We're leaving. You stay quiet for 1 hour. You live. You raise the alarm before then. We come back and finish this. Understand? Both men nodded frantically. Good. Caleb backed toward the door, keeping them covered. Mika, Neshoba, let's move. They slipped back into the night, loaded down with weapons and ammunition, moving fast away from the depot. Behind them, the building remained dark and quiet. They'd done it. In and out, no shots fired, exactly as planned. They were a mile away when they heard the first shouts. They raised the alarm early, Dakota said, breathing hard from the pace. Figured they might. Caleb didn't slow down. Doesn't matter. We've got enough distance. Keep moving. They ran through the darkness, weapons clanking, hearts pounding. Behind them, distant lights appeared, torches, lanterns, men on horseback starting to search. But Neshoba knew the terrain, knew every hidden path and deer trail, and he led them through country where horses couldn't follow. By the time they reached the canyon, dawn was breaking and they were all exhausted. But they'd made it. And they'd brought enough firepower to make a real fight of it. Kuwanyama was waiting at the entrance, arms crossed. You're late. We brought presents, Caleb said, dropping his sack at her feet. She looked inside, then at him, then did something he'd never seen her do before. She smiled. You'll do, Rourke. You'll do. The third day was when everything came together. The fighters took to the new weapons quickly, drilling with them until the movements became instinctive. Caleb pushed them harder than before, knowing they were running out of time, knowing that Hale would be coming soon, because he would be coming. The depot raid had announced their presence, proved they were organized and dangerous. Hale wouldn't ignore that. He'd come to crush them before they became a real threat, which was exactly what Caleb was counting on. That evening, he gathered everyone in Kuwanyama's dwelling, all 15 fighters plus the elder herself. Ayana sat up front, still pale but stronger, her eyes burning with the fierce determination he'd come to recognize. Tomorrow, Caleb said without preamble, Hale is going to attack this canyon. I'd stake my life on it. Silence. Then Dakota asked, How do you know? Because we hit his supply depot. Because we've proven we're not just running and hiding anymore. Because he's been winning so long he's gotten arrogant, and arrogant men don't wait for threats to grow. They crush them immediately. Caleb looked around at the assembled faces. So we let him come, and we make sure he regrets it. You want to fight him here? Mika said. In our home? No, I want to fight him here, in the place you know better than anyone alive, in the terrain that favors small, mobile forces over large, heavily armed ones, in the canyon that has 100 hiding places and exactly one way in. Caleb pulled out a rough map he'd drawn on a piece of cloth. This is how we do it. He laid out the plan. It was brutal, risky, and depended on timing, terrain, and luck, but it was also the best chance they had. The fighters listened without interrupting, absorbing every detail, asking sharp questions that showed they understood the stakes. When he finished, Kuwanyama spoke. And what happens when we win? If we win. Then we move fast. Take the evidence Ayana mentioned, ride hard for the territorial capital, find someone with enough authority to actually do something about Hale. Caleb met her eyes. It's not a perfect plan. Hell, it's barely a plan at all. But it's what we've got. What makes you think anyone will listen? The old woman asked quietly. What makes you think the people in power will care about dead natives and stolen land? It was the same question Ayana had asked. Caleb still didn't have a good answer, so he gave them the truth. I don't know if they will, but I know they won't if we don't try. And I'd rather die trying than live knowing I could have done something and didn't. Kuwanyama studied him for a long time. Then she looked at her people, the survivors, the fighters, the ones who'd lost everything and kept going anyway. My grandchildren, she said softly, what do you choose? One by one, they spoke, some in English, some in their own language. But the meaning was clear in every voice. They would fight. They would stand. They would make Hale pay for every drop of blood he'd spilled. When the last person had spoken, Kuwanyama nodded. Then we fight. May our ancestors guide us. The meeting broke up, people dispersing to prepare. Caleb found himself alone with Ayana outside the dwelling, both of them looking up at the stars. This is insane, she said. Yeah. We're probably all going to die. Yeah. But if we do this right, if we actually pull this off, she trailed off, then smiled that fierce, terrible smile. Hale's going to wish he'd killed me when he had the chance. That's the spirit. She turned to face him, her expression serious now. Why are you really doing this, Rourke? And don't give me that line about having a conscience. There's more to it than that. Caleb thought about it, really thought about it. About the villages he'd burned under orders, about the faces that haunted his dreams, about 2 years of running from himself and finding nothing but empty spaces and emptier bottles. I spent most of my life being part of the problem, he said finally. Maybe I can't fix that. Maybe there's no redemption for the things I've done. But I can stop being the problem. I can stand on the right side for once, even if it kills me. He looked at her. That enough of a reason? Yeah, Ayanna said softly. Yeah, that's enough. They stood there in the starlight, two broken people preparing for a fight that would probably end them both. But for the first time since Caleb could remember, he felt something like peace. Not happiness. He wasn't sure he'd ever feel that again. But purpose. Direction. The sense that his life, however it ended, would mean something. Get some rest, he told Ayanna. Tomorrow's going to be hell. Looking forward to it, she said, and meant it. Caleb went to his shelter and tried to sleep. But his mind was racing, running through the plan, identifying weaknesses, calculating odds. They were going up against a force that outnumbered them at least 3-1, maybe more. Going up against men with better weapons, better training, better everything. But they had something Hale's men didn't. They had something to fight for besides money. They had home, family, justice. And they had the absolute fury of people who'd been pushed too far and refused to be pushed anymore. It would have to be enough. Somewhere in the darkest part of the night, Caleb finally drifted off. He dreamed of fire and blood, of faces he'd tried to forget, of a woman kneeling in the dirt with burning eyes. But when he woke in the cold gray dawn, he felt ready. The fighters were already assembling, checking weapons, taking positions. Caleb made one last circuit of the defenses, making small adjustments, offering quiet words of encouragement. Dakota stood at the canyon entrance with 3 others, ready to give the signal when Hale's men appeared. Kuanyama found him as he was helping Ayanna into position behind a rock shelf that offered good cover and clear sight lines. Rourke, the old woman said, whatever happens today, know this. You've given us something we thought we'd lost. Hope. And the chance to die like warriors instead of victims. We're not planning to die, ma'am. Plans change. She gripped his shoulder, surprising strength in those old fingers. But intentions matter. Thank you for your intentions. Before he could respond, Dakota's whistle cut through the morning air. 3 short blasts. The signal. They were coming. Caleb moved to his position, a narrow ledge overlooking the canyon entrance. He could see them now, maybe 40 men on horseback, riding in a loose column with the arrogance of people who'd never faced real resistance. At their head rode a man in a fine coat on a black horse. Victor Hale himself, come to crush the rebellion personally. Big mistake. Caleb raised his hand, waiting. The column entered the canyon, hoofbeats echoing off the stone walls. 20 yards in, 30, 40. Almost in position. He could see their faces now, hard men with harder eyes, the kind who killed for pay and slept fine afterward. Hale raised his hand, halting the column. He stood in his stirrups, looking around at the empty canyon with an expression of amused contempt. I know you're here, he called out, his voice echoing. There's nowhere left to run. Come out now and maybe I'll make it quick. Caleb looked at Ayanna, crouched behind her rock with a rifle in her hands. She met his eyes and nodded once, fierce and ready. He dropped his hand. The canyon exploded into violence. The first volley came from both sides of the canyon simultaneously, 15 rifles firing as one. The sound was deafening in the confined space, echoing off stone walls like thunder trapped in a bottle. 3 of Hale's men went down immediately, pitched from their saddles before they knew what hit them. Horses screamed and reared, throwing more riders. The neat column dissolved into chaos. Reload! Caleb shouted, though he could barely hear his own voice over the ringing in his ears. He worked the lever on his rifle, ejecting the spent cartridge, chambering another round. Below, Hale's men were scattering, some trying to charge forward, others wheeling their horses back toward the entrance. Exactly what they'd expected, exactly what they'd planned for. The second volley hit the men trying to retreat. Dakota and his group at the canyon entrance opened fire, cutting down the lead riders. The ones behind crashed into them, a tangle of panicked horses and cursing men. They were boxed in now, caught between 2 fields of fire with nowhere to go but straight into the kill zone. Hold, Caleb called. His fighters stopped shooting, waiting. Let Hale's men think. Let them believe they had a moment to organize. Let them make the next mistake. Hale was screaming orders, trying to rally his men. Even in chaos, Caleb had to admire his composure. Most men would have broken already, but Hale was a different breed of bastard. He'd dismounted, taken cover behind a dead horse, and was directing fire with sharp, precise commands. His men responded, years of hired violence overcoming the initial shock. They started shooting back, bullets whining off the rocks, forcing Caleb's fighters to keep their heads down. "They're finding their backbone," Mika called from her position 20 feet away. "Then we break it," Caleb said. He raised his hand again, this time making a circular motion. The signal for the next phase. From positions higher up the canyon walls, his fighters started rolling rocks. Not huge boulders, they didn't have the leverage for that, but stones the size of a man's head, dozens of them, bouncing and tumbling down the steep slopes. The effect was devastating. Horses bolted, men dove for cover, and the fragile organization Hale had been building shattered like glass. "Now!" Ayana's voice cut through the chaos. She was on her feet, rifle to her shoulder, firing methodically at targets below. The wound in her side had to be screaming, but her hands were steady, her aim true. 2 shots, 2 men down. She ducked back behind the rock as a return fire chipped stone where her head had been. "You're supposed to be staying in cover!" Caleb shouted at her. "So are you!" Fair point. He was standing fully exposed on his ledge, rifle smoking, completely focused on the battle below. Old cavalry habits. You couldn't lead from behind, couldn't see the field if you were hiding. But it also made you a target, and even as the thought crossed his mind, a bullet cracked past his ear close enough to feel the wind. He dropped flat, heart hammering. That was close. Too close. Below, Hale's force was trying something new. A concentrated charge toward the canyon wall where Ayana's group was positioned. Smart, actually. If they could overrun one position, break through the ambush, they'd have a chance. 8 men, moving fast on foot, using the scattered rocks for cover, laying down suppressing fire as they advanced. "Ayana, fall back!" Caleb shouted. She either didn't hear him or ignored him. Instead, she shifted position, moving along the rock shelf to get a better angle. The men charging her position were almost at the base of the wall now, starting to climb. In 30 seconds, they'd be on top of her. Caleb made a decision. He half slid, half fell down from his perch, landed hard, and ran along the canyon floor toward Ayana's position. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. One tugged at his coat. He didn't slow down, trusting speed and chaos to keep him alive. He reached the rock shelf just as the first of Hale's men appeared over the edge. The man saw Caleb, tried to bring his rifle around. Caleb was faster, swinging his own rifle like a club. The stock connected with the man's jaw with a sickening crack. He went over backward, crashed into the man below him, and both fell 15 feet to the rocks. "Behind you!" Ayana screamed. Caleb spun. 2 more men had found another route up, were flanking him from the left. He fired from the hip, pure instinct, and got lucky. The first man clutched his chest and dropped. The second one was on him before he could work the lever, slamming into him with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. They went down together, rolling, fighting for control of the rifle between them. The man was younger, stronger, and had murder in his eyes. He wrenched the rifle free, raised it like a club. Caleb caught the movement in his peripheral vision, jerked his head to the side. The rifle stock smashed into the rock where his skull had been a heartbeat before. Caleb drove his knee up, caught the man in the gut, and when he doubled over gasping, Caleb grabbed a rock and brought it down on the back of his head. Once. Twice. The man went limp. Caleb pushed him off, grabbed the rifle, and looked up to find Ayana staring at him with wide eyes. "You all right?" he asked, breathing hard. "You just saved my life. Now we're even." He pulled himself up, every muscle protesting. "We need to reposition. They're adapting too fast." She nodded, already moving. They scrambled along the shelf to a new vantage point, arriving just as Takota's group opened up with another volley. Caleb did a quick count of the men below, maybe 25 still standing, half of Hale's original force. Good odds, considering. But they were getting organized now, forming defensive positions, making themselves harder targets. And worse, they'd found cover that protected them from the crossfire. A cluster of large boulders in the center of the canyon, probably placed there by some ancient rock slide. Hale had rallied his remaining men there, creating a fortress that neither the high positions nor the canyon entrance could effectively target. Stalemate, which meant time to adapt. Caleb caught Takota's attention, used hand signals to communicate the new plan. Takota's expression said he thought Caleb was crazy, but he nodded and started moving his fighters into position. Meanwhile, Caleb turned to Ayanna. I need you to do something for me. I'm not going to like this, am I? Probably not. I need you to get to Kawanyama's dwelling, gather everything that documents what Hale's done, anything that could serve as evidence. Maps, if you made them. Drawings, anything. Why? We're in the middle of a fight. Because if this goes bad, I need someone to get that evidence out of here. Get it to the territorial capital, to a federal marshal, to someone who matters. He gripped her shoulder. You're the only one who knows what you saw. If you die here, the truth dies with you. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by anger. You're planning something stupid. I'm planning to end this fight before more of our people die. That's not stupid, that's necessary. He could see her preparing to argue, so he cut her off. Ayanna, listen to me. I've been fighting wars for 20 years. This is what I'm good at. But you're good at surviving, at carrying truth. So let me do my job while you do yours. She stared at him for a long moment, conflict warring across her face. Then she grabbed his collar, pulled him close, and kissed him hard. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, fierce and desperate, and completely unexpected. Don't die stupidly, shit, she said when she let go. Working on it. She disappeared down the back trail toward Kawanyama's dwelling. Caleb watched her go, touched his lips where she'd kissed him, then shook his head and focused on the problem at hand. Hale's men were dug in, protected from rifle fire. Standard siege situation, which meant he needed to make them move. He made his way back along the canyon floor, staying low, using the scattered rocks for cover. Bullets still whined overhead occasionally, but the shooting had tapered off to sporadic exchanges, both sides conserving ammunition, waiting for an opening. He reached Neshoba's position, found the young man crouched behind a boulder with a canvas bag at his feet. You still have the blasting powder from the depot? Caleb asked. Neshoba nodded, patting the bag. Good. I need you to do something dangerous. Everything today is dangerous. Neshoba's smile was fierce. What do you need? Caleb explained. Neshoba listened without interrupting, then looked at the bag of powder, then at Hale's fortified position, then back at Caleb. That will probably kill me, Neshoba said. Yeah, but it will definitely kill them. That's the idea. Neshoba considered this with the calm of someone who'd already accepted his death and was just deciding on the details. My father died fighting soldiers, he said quietly. My mother died in the march when they forced us from our lands. My sister died last winter because we had no food, no shelter, nothing. He picked up the bag. I have nothing left to lose except my chance to make them pay. So yes, I'll do it. You don't have to. I can find another way. There is no other way. We both know it. Neshoba started preparing the explosives, his hands steady and sure. Besides, someone needs to show these rich men that we're not afraid to die. They think they can break us with fear. Let them learn otherwise. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to stop him, wanted to find some brilliant alternative that didn't require sacrifice. But he'd been a soldier too long to lie to himself. Sometimes the only way forward was through blood and fire, and sometimes good people died buying time for others to live. How long do you need? Caleb asked. 5 minutes to prepare. Then I need someone to create a distraction while I get close enough to throw this where it'll do the most damage. I'll handle the distraction. Caleb checked his rifle. 4 rounds left. His revolver was empty, hadn't had time to reload it. 4 rounds to keep 24 men occupied while Neshoba made his approach. The math wasn't encouraging, but since when had the math ever been on his side? He moved back to a position with clear sightlines to Hale's fortress, signaling to the other fighters to hold their fire. Let Hale's men relax. Let them think the attack had stalled out. Meanwhile, Neshoba worked with the blasting powder, creating something that would either save them all or kill him for nothing. Caleb's mind drifted, watching the men below. Some of them were wounded, bloody, scared. They were hired guns, sure, killers for pay. But they were also men, most of them probably with families, with lives they'd go back to if they survived this. He was about to try to kill as many of them as he could, and some part of him still recoiled from that. But then he thought about the mass graves Ayanna had found, about children buried in lime pits, about people forced from their homes at gunpoint and shot when they refused to abandon everything they knew. Hale's men had made their choice when they took his money. They'd made it again every time they pulled a trigger or swung a club or looked the other way while atrocities happened. Sometimes there was no right choice, just the choice you could live with or die making. Ready? Neshoba whispered, appearing at his elbow. Caleb took a breath, steadied himself, then stood up fully exposed on top of his rock. Hail! He shouted. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. Every head below swiveled toward him. Rifles started to come up. Hale stood from behind his cover, staring up at Caleb with an expression of surprise and fury. You, he said. The fool who bought the savage. I should have killed you in Red Hollow. Probably. Caleb kept his rifle pointed at the ground, non-threatening, buying time while Neshoba moved. But you didn't, and now here we are. Here you are, Hale corrected, trapped in a canyon with nowhere to run and not enough ammunition to finish the fight you started. Surrender now, and I'll consider making it quick. Appreciate the offer. Have to decline. Caleb could see Neshoba out of the corner of his eye, moving like a shadow along the canyon wall, working his way closer to Hale's position. 30 feet to go. 25. Keep talking. See, the thing is, we've got evidence of what you've been doing. The mass graves, the illegal mining on protected land, the murders. All documented, all ready to be delivered to people who'll actually care. Hale laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Evidence? From who? A dead savage and a washed-up cavalry deserter? No one will believe you. No one will even listen to you. Maybe, but I'll bet they'll listen to a federal marshal, or a territorial judge, or the newspapers back east who love a good story about corruption and massacre. Caleb was improvising now, saying anything to keep Hale focused on him. You've gotten comfortable, Hale, sloppy, and sloppy men make mistakes. The only mistake was letting you walk out of Red Hollow alive. Hale raised his hand, and a dozen rifles swung toward Caleb. Goodbye, Rourke. Neshoba threw the bomb. It was a perfect throw, arcing high through the air, trailing smoke from the lit fuse. Caleb saw it, saw Hale's men see it, saw the moment of panic as they realized what was coming. Then he threw himself backward off the rock as every gun below opened fire at once. The explosion was massive, far bigger than Caleb had expected. The canyon shook, rocks falling from the walls, smoke and dust billowing out in a choking cloud. Men screamed, horses scattered. And through it all, Caleb heard Neshoba's voice raised in a war cry that was abruptly cut short. Caleb hit the ground hard, rolled, came up coughing. His ears were ringing so badly he couldn't hear anything else. Smoke obscured everything, turning the world into gray chaos. He fumbled for his rifle, found it, started moving toward where Hale's position had been. The smoke began to clear. What had been a fortress of boulders was now a crater. Bodies lay scattered, some moving, most not. The survivors were staggering around in shock, disoriented, weapons dropped or forgotten. And in the center of it all stood Victor Hale, bleeding from a dozen cuts, clothes torn, but still alive. Still standing. Their eyes met through the clearing smoke. Hale went for his gun. Caleb brought up his rifle, but a hand clamped on the barrel, pushing it down. Dakota appeared beside him, eyes blazing with rage and grief. He's mine, Dakota said. Before Caleb could respond, Dakota was charging forward, knife in hand, crossing the distance between them and Hale in seconds. Hale fired once, twice. The first shot missed. The second took Dakota in the shoulder, spinning him around, but he didn't go down, just adjusted his grip on the knife and kept coming. They crashed together, two men fighting with the desperate fury of people who knew only one of them was walking away. They went down rolling, each trying to get the knife, to get leverage, to get the killing angle. Caleb moved to help, but Mika grabbed his arm. Let him finish it, she said. He needs this. Caleb understood. Dakota's father, his village, everything he'd lost. It was all wrapped up in Hale, in what Hale represented. This wasn't just a fight. It was justice, or revenge, or whatever word you wanted to use for the moment when a man who'd lost everything finally got the chance to make someone pay. Dakota got on top, pinned Hale's arms with his knees, and raised the knife. Hale's eyes went wide with genuine fear for the first time. Wait, Hale gasped. Wait, we can make a deal. Money, land, whatever you want. Dakota paused, the knife trembling in his hand. For a moment, Caleb thought he might actually listen, might let greed or mercy or exhaustion stay his hand. Then Dakota spoke, his voice shaking with rage and grief and 2 decades of accumulated pain. You killed my father. You poisoned our water. You turned our sacred places into garbage pits. You sold us like animals and buried us in mass graves when we refused to disappear. The knife came down. There is no deal. It was quick, at least. Cleaner than Hale deserved, but quick. When it was done, Dakota stood, dropped the bloody knife, and just stared at his hands. The fight had drained out of the canyon, both sides pausing in exhausted shock. Hale's remaining men, maybe a dozen, were slowly raising their hands in surrender, too beaten to continue. Caleb made a quick circuit, checking casualties. 3 of his fighters were dead: Neshoba, an older woman named Kiona, and the boy who'd brought him stew that first day. His name had been Yuma. Caleb remembered because Yuma had told him about his father, about the soldiers, about how everyone was wiser than Caleb. Caleb closed the boy's eyes and felt something break inside his chest. 5 more were wounded, 2 seriously. Hale's force had been decimated, 30 dead or dying, a dozen surrendered. It was a victory by any military measure. It felt like drowning. Ayana appeared, supporting Kuwanyama, who looked pale but determined. The old woman surveyed the carnage without expression, then walked to where Dakota stood frozen, still staring at his bloody hands. "Grandson," she said softly. Dakota looked at her, and the mask he'd been wearing cracked. He fell to his knees, shoulders shaking, and she held him while he wept. Caleb turned away, giving them privacy. He found Mika organizing the prisoners, binding their hands, confiscating weapons. She looked up as he approached. "What do we do with them, Shoshima?" she asked. Good question. They couldn't keep prisoners. Couldn't let them go free either. They'd just regroup, come back stronger. And executing surrendered men went against every rule of war Caleb had ever learned, no matter how much they might deserve it. "Lock them in one of the storage caves," he said finally. "Guard them until we figure out the next move. Make sure the wounded get water and basic care. We're not them." Mika nodded and went to work. Caleb walked through the canyon, helping where he could, checking on his fighters, trying not to think about the 3 bodies that would need burying, trying not to think about Yuma's father and whether the boy's death was somehow Caleb's fault for bringing him into this fight. He found Ayana sitting on a rock near Kuwanyama's dwelling, holding a leather-bound journal. Her hands were shaking. "I found my notes," she said quietly. "Everything I documented before Hale caught me, plus some papers I took from one of his men. Looks like correspondence, orders, maybe even ledgers." She looked up at Caleb with haunted eyes. "We have the evidence. We can prove what he did." "Good." Caleb sat beside her, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "That's good. Neshoba didn't die for nothing then. None of them did." But she didn't sound convinced, and neither was he. They sat in silence while the canyon slowly returned to something resembling calm. The prisoners were secured, the wounded tended, the dead wrapped in blankets until they could be properly buried. Dakota eventually emerged from Kuwanyama's dwelling, eyes red but face composed, and began helping organize the aftermath. As the sun reached its peak, Caleb gathered the survivors for a quick meeting. 11 fighters left able to travel, plus Kuwanyama, who insisted she was coming despite her age. 13 people to ride to the territorial capital, present evidence, and hope someone in authority actually gave a damn. "We leave at first light tomorrow," Caleb said. "Take only what we need: weapons, food, the evidence. Travel fast and light. It's 3 days hard riding to the capital, maybe 4. We can't afford to stop." "What about Hale's men?" someone asked. "We take 2 with us, ones who look like they might actually testify about what they've seen, what they've done. The rest we release after we're gone. They won't follow. They've got no employer anymore, no reason to fight." "And if they do follow?" Mika asked. "Then we deal with it when it happens, but I'm betting they're more interested in staying alive than seeking revenge." Caleb looked around at the tired, bloody, grieving faces. "Listen to me. We won. We beat Hale. We survived. That's more than most people in your position ever get. But winning the fight isn't the same as winning the war. The war doesn't end until we get justice, real justice, the kind that comes with trials and convictions and laws actually enforced." "You think we'll get that?" Dakota's voice was flat, drained of emotion. "I don't know, Caleb said honestly. "But I know we won't if we don't try. And I know that Neshoba and Kiona and Yuma deserve better than us giving up now." Silence. Then Kuwanyama spoke, her voice carrying despite her age. My grandchildren, we have bled on this ground. We have died on this ground. Our ancestors watch us from the stars and ask what we will do next. Will we hide in canyons forever, growing smaller and weaker until we're just ghosts of a people who once stood proud? Or will we stand now, walk into the places of power, and demand they see us as human beings worthy of justice? She looked at each of them in turn. I am old. I have seen more death than I can count, but I will ride to this capital city. I will speak truth to power, and if they kill me for it, at least I will die on my feet instead of on my knees. One by one, the fighters nodded. They would ride. They would fight with words and evidence instead of rifles, but they would fight. And watching them find their courage again despite everything, Caleb felt something shift inside himself. Not redemption exactly, but maybe the first step toward it. That night they held a funeral for the fallen. No elaborate ceremony, no long speeches. Just simple words spoken over wrapped bodies before they were buried in the canyon floor. Caleb said a few words for Yuma, about bravery and sacrifice, and the cruelty of a world that took children before their time. He didn't know if the words meant anything, but they needed to be said. Afterward, he found himself alone with Ayanna again, both of them too keyed up to sleep despite their exhaustion. "You could leave now," she said quietly. "You've done what you set out to do. Saved me, stopped Hale, gave us a fighting chance. No one would blame you for riding away and letting us finish this ourselves. You want me to leave? I want you to have the choice. You've earned it." She looked at him in the firelight, her expression unreadable. "But I'd like you to stay, if you want to." Caleb thought about it, thought about how easy it would be to disappear again, find another nowhere town, another anonymous existence. No more fighting, no more death, just quiet obscurity until his past caught up with him, or he drank himself into the ground. But he also thought about Ayanna's fierce determination, about Kuwanyama's courage, about a boy named Yuma who died fighting for something bigger than himself. And he realized that for the first time in 2 years, he actually wanted to see something through to the end. "I'm staying," he said. "At least until we reach the capital. After that," he shrugged. "We'll see." She smiled, and it was different from her usual fierce grin, softer, more vulnerable. "Good, because I still don't trust you not to do something stupid, and someone needs to keep you alive long enough to testify." "Fair point." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Tomorrow they would ride. Tomorrow they would begin the next part of the fight, the part that involved laws and courts and politicians instead of rifles and explosives, the part that would test their faith in a system that had repeatedly failed them. But tonight they had survived. Tonight they could rest and remember the dead and prepare for whatever came next. And for Caleb Rourke, a man who'd been running from himself for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still, that was enough. Part 5. Lưu ý. Viết 9.000 đến 9.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, phà hồi, thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột. Không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, có quan điểm cá nhân, thông điệp, bài học, góc nhìn con người. Nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hồi thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương, sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang, có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ đàn bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Showmore 1236, Part 5. They rode out at dawn, 13 people on horseback with 2 of Hale's men bound and trailing behind on a lead rope. The canyon looked different in the morning light, quieter, emptier, like something vital had been bled out of it along with the men who'd died there. Caleb took one last look back as they cleared the entrance, wondering if he'd ever see this place again, wondering if any of them would. The ride to the territorial capital was hard and fast, exactly as brutal as Caleb had promised. They pushed the horses to their limits, stopping only when absolutely necessary, sleeping in shifts with guards posted. Every shadow could be an ambush. Every distant rider could be reinforcements coming to finish what Hale had started. But the attacks never came. The world seemed oddly quiet, like it was holding its breath. On the second day, they passed through a small settlement, barely more than a trading post and a dozen scattered buildings. Caleb rode in alone first, cautious, ready for trouble. What he found instead was a fat man behind a counter who took one look at him and said, "You hear about Victor Hale?" Caleb's hand drifted toward his rifle. "What about him?" "Dead, they're saying. Him and near 40 of his men, killed in some kind of ambush up in the Red Rock country. Wild stuff." The man leaned forward conspiratorially. "Folks are saying it was natives. Others saying it was a rival mining operation. Me, I don't much care. Hale was a bastard who had it coming." "That right?" "Damn right. He owned half this territory through fear and violence, and now he's worm food. Good riddance." The man studied Caleb more carefully. "You got the look of someone who's been in a fight recently. That how you got those cuts on your face?" "Fell off my horse, Caleb said. "Sure you did." But the man smiled like he knew exactly what kind of falling Caleb meant. "Well, if you happen to run into whoever killed that son of a bitch, you tell them they got a lot of grateful people around these parts. Not everyone was happy with how Hale ran things." Caleb bought supplies and left without another word, but the conversation stuck with him. The fat man wasn't the only one who felt that way. Over the next 2 days, in every settlement and way station they passed, the story was the same. Hale was dead, and while some people were angry, more were relieved. The tyrant had finally fallen, and the territory was exhaling. It gave Caleb hope. Not much, but enough. They reached the territorial capital on the 4th day, tired and filthy and running on nothing but determination and bad coffee. The city was bigger than Caleb expected. Actual streets, buildings made of brick instead of wood, people dressed in clothes that hadn't been worn through and patched a dozen times. Civilization, or at least the frontier's best approximation of it. "Where do we go?" Ayanna asked. She looked worse than the rest of them, the wound in her side clearly paining her despite her refusal to acknowledge it. "Federal marshal? Territorial courthouse?" "Both, probably. But first we need someone who'll listen long enough to look at the evidence." Caleb had been thinking about this for days, running through options. "We need a lawyer. Someone who knows how this system works and can navigate it without getting us thrown in jail for murder." "Oh, we didn't murder anyone," Dakota said sharply. "It was a fair fight." "You think a white judge is going to see it that way? You think he's going to care about the difference between justice and murder when the dead man is a wealthy businessman and the killers are natives?" Caleb shook his head. "We need legal cover. Someone who can present the evidence properly, make the case in terms the law will understand." They found a lawyer in a small office above a dry goods store. Samuel Pierce, a thin man in his 50s with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked up from his desk with obvious surprise when 13 trail-worn riders crowded into his waiting room. "Can I help you?" His voice was cautious, nervous. Caleb stepped forward, removing his hat. "Mr. Pierce, my name is Caleb Rourke. We need legal representation for a matter involving murder, illegal mining, and corruption of territorial officials. And we need it fast." Pierce blinked. "That's quite a list. Perhaps you should start at the beginning." So they did. Caleb laid out the whole story while Ayanna spread the evidence across Pierce's desk. Her journal with its detailed accounts and drawings, the papers taken from Hale's men showing orders and payment records, testimony from the 2 prisoners about what they'd witnessed. Pierce listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock to grim determination. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents with a lawyer's careful eye. "This is explosive," he said finally. "If even half of this is true, and based on what I'm seeing, it appears to be, you're talking about systematic genocide, corruption at multiple levels of government, and enough criminal activity to fill a courthouse for years." He looked up at them. "You understand what you're asking for? The people implicated in this aren't just Hale and his hired guns. You're talking about the territorial governor's office, the mining authority, Possibly even federal officials who turned a blind eye. I understand, Caleb said. Can you help us or not? Pierce took off his spectacles, cleaned them slowly, put them back on. 20 years ago, I came west believing in justice, believing the law could protect the innocent and punish the guilty, regardless of who they were or how much money they had. And for 20 years, I've watched that belief get ground down by reality, by corrupt judges and bought politicians, and a system that protects the powerful while ignoring everyone else. He stood up, gathered the documents into a neat pile. But every once in a while, a case comes along that reminds you why you started doing this in the first place, a case that matters. He extended his hand to Caleb. I'll take your case, Mr. Rourke, and I'll see it through to the end, wherever that leads. They shook hands. It felt like a beginning. The next week was a blur of legal maneuvering that made Caleb's head spin. Pierce worked like a man possessed, filing motions, gathering additional evidence, interviewing witnesses. He brought in the territorial marshal, a hard-eyed man named Clayton who'd apparently been trying to build a case against Hale for years, but lacked the evidence to make it stick. With Ayanna's documentation and the testimony from Hale's captured men, suddenly everything fell into place. An investigation was opened, officials were subpoenaed. The territorial governor himself was questioned under oath about his relationship with Hale's mining operation. And slowly, methodically, the entire corrupt structure began to collapse. But it wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean. Hale's allies fought back hard, using every legal trick and political connection they had. They tried to discredit Ayanna's testimony, claiming she was an unreliable witness. They tried to paint Caleb as a disgraced cavalry deserter with an axe to grind. They even tried to claim the fight in the canyon had been unprovoked aggression, making Hale's men the victims. Pierce dismantled every argument with surgical precision, but it was exhausting work and dangerous. Twice, men approached Caleb on the street with thinly veiled threats. Once, someone threw a rock through Pierce's office window with a note that said, "Drop the case or drop dead." Pierce burned the note and kept working. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into the investigation when Marshal Clayton's men discovered Hale's private records in a locked safe at his Red Hollow office. Ledgers documenting bribes paid to officials, contracts for the sale of land that wasn't his to sell, and worst of all, a series of letters discussing the removal of native populations from mining territories, written in Hale's own hand, detailing exactly how many people needed to disappear and how much it would cost to make it happen. The evidence was damning, undeniable, and absolutely horrifying. Within days, indictments were issued. The territorial governor resigned in disgrace. 3 judges were suspended pending investigation. And the case against Hale's operation, posthumous though it was, became a sensation, covered by newspapers as far east as New York and Boston. Caleb watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment, like he was observing someone else's life. He'd expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even triumph. Instead, he mostly felt tired and old and aware that justice, even when it came, couldn't bring back the dead or undo the damage. One evening, he found himself sitting on the porch of the boarding house where they'd been staying, staring at the sunset and thinking about Yuma, about Neshoba, about all the faces he couldn't save in this fight or any of the others that had come before. Ayanna joined him, moving stiffly, but better than she had been. The wound was healing, finally, properly cared for by a real doctor, instead of frontier medicine in desperation. Pierce says the trial starts in 2 weeks, she said, sitting beside him. He thinks we have a strong case, thinks we might actually win. Good. You don't sound happy about it. I am, just... He struggled to find the words. I keep thinking about what Kuanyama said, about how even if we prove everything, even if we get convictions and justice and all of it, it doesn't change what's already happened. Doesn't bring back the dead. Doesn't give your people their land back, or their lives back, or anything back. Ayanna was quiet for a moment. No, she said finally. It doesn't, but it might stop it from happening again. Might make the next Victor Hale think twice before massacring people for profit. And that's worth something, isn't it? Is it enough? I don't know. Ask me again in 10 years, when we see if anything actually changes. She leaned back against the porch railing, studying him. You're thinking about leaving, aren't you? Caleb didn't answer immediately. He'd been thinking about it, turning it over in his mind for days. The fight was over. The evidence was in. They had lawyers and marshals and the full weight of the law on their side now. What did they need a washed-up cavalry officer for? Maybe, he said. After the trial, once everything's settled, where would you go? Don't know, further west probably. Find another nowhere town, another quiet corner to disappear into. He looked at her. What about you? What happens to your people when this is all done? We go home, or what's left of it. Her expression was hard to read. The land Hale stole, the court says it'll be returned to us, or at least the parts that aren't completely destroyed. We can rebuild, start over, try to piece together something from the wreckage. That's good. That's something. It's a beginning. She paused, then said carefully, we could use someone who knows how to organize people, how to build defenses, how to deal with the kind of men who might try what Hale tried now that there's a power vacuum. Caleb turned to look at her fully. You asking me to stay? I'm saying there's a place for you if you want it, not as a soldier, not as someone giving orders or leading charges, just as someone who's part of something, part of a community trying to survive. She met his eyes. You said you wanted to stop being part of the problem. This is your chance to be part of the solution. He wanted to say yes. The word was right there, ready, but old habits were hard to break, and the instinct to run, to avoid attachment, to keep moving before the ghosts caught up, that instinct was still strong. Let me think about it, he said. She nodded, not pushing. Take your time, we're not going anywhere. The trial, when it finally began, was a spectacle. The courthouse was packed every day, people standing in the aisles and crowding outside the windows just to hear the testimony. Pierce presented the evidence methodically, building his case piece by piece until the full scope of Hale's crimes was laid bare for everyone to see. Ayanna testified for 3 days straight, describing what she'd found in the valleys, the mass graves, the systematic destruction. She spoke clearly and without emotion, letting the facts speak for themselves. The courtroom was silent as death while she talked, people listening to horrors they'd rather not believe. Caleb testified too, describing the ambush, the fight, the circumstances that led to Hale's death. The defense attorney tried to paint him as a violent man who'd escalated the conflict, but Pierce shut that down with evidence of Hale's men attacking first, burning Caleb's cabin, hunting them through the wilderness. The 2 captured men testified as well, reluctantly at first, but Pierce had offered them immunity in exchange for cooperation. What they revealed was devastating. Orders to kill, to intimidate, to dispose of bodies. One of them broke down crying on the stand, describing a massacre of women and children that Hale had personally ordered. It took the jury 4 hours to reach a verdict on the conspiracy charges against Hale's surviving associates and the officials who'd enabled him. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers and shouts, equal parts celebration and outrage. Sentencing came a week later. Prison terms ranging from 10 years to life, depending on the degree of involvement. The territorial governor was stripped of his position and faced federal charges. The mining operation was shut down permanently, the land designated for return to its original inhabitants. It was justice, as close to real justice as the system could provide. And sitting in that courtroom, listening to the judge read the sentences, Caleb felt something release in his chest. Not redemption, but maybe the possibility of it. The knowledge that for once, he'd stood on the right side of a fight and seen it through to the end. Afterward, they gathered at Pierce's office for what felt like a wake and a celebration at the same time. The lawyer had broken out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion, and they toasted the verdict, the fallen, and the uncertain future that stretched ahead. What will you do now? Pierce asked Caleb. You've become something of a celebrity, you know. The newspapers are calling you a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who did what needed doing. That's what heroes are, Pierce said. People who do the hard thing when everyone else looks away. Caleb didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. He finished his whiskey and excused himself, needing air, needing space to think. He walked through this capital's streets as the sun set, watching people go about their evening routines, closing shops, heading home, living ordinary lives in a world that had just shifted slightly toward something better. He found himself at the edge of town, looking west toward the mountains, toward the canyon and the red rocks and everything that had happened there, toward the future, whatever shape it took. You're still thinking about leaving. Ayana's voice behind him wasn't a question. Old habits. I get it. Running's easier than staying. Staying means you have to care, and caring means you can get hurt. She stood beside him, both of them looking at the mountains. But it also means you get to be part of something, and I think you're tired of being alone. She was right. He was tired of it. Tired of moving from place to place with no purpose, no connection, no reason to wake up in the morning beyond basic survival. The last month had shown him what it felt like to matter, to be part of something larger than himself. And now that he'd tasted it, the thought of going back to emptiness seemed unbearable. What would I even do? He asked. I'm a soldier. I know how to fight and kill and follow orders. Not exactly skills that translate to peaceful living. You know how to organize people, how to train them, prepare them, give them confidence. We need that, not for fighting, though we might need that too, eventually, but for building, for creating something that lasts. She turned to face him. And you're more than just a soldier, Caleb. You're a man who chose mercy when violence was easier, who spent his last dollar on a stranger, who stood up to a tyrant when walking away would have been safer. Those are the qualities we need. You've got me built up into something I'm not. I've got you seen as exactly what you are. A decent man trying to make up for past mistakes. That's not heroic. That's just human, and we could use more human right now. Caleb looked at her, this fierce, stubborn, brilliant woman who'd survived things that should have broken her and came out stronger instead, who'd trusted him when she had every reason not to, who was offering him something he'd thought he'd lost forever, a place to belong. All right, he said quietly. I'll stay. At least for a while, see how it goes. Her smile was radiant. Good, because Kuanyauma's already started building you a cabin near hers, and she'd be really annoyed if you made her waste the effort. She what? Started 3 days ago. Said you'd come around eventually, just needed time to stop being stupid. Ayana laughed at his expression. You really think you had a choice in this? Once Kuanyama decides something, it happens. You should know that by now. Despite everything, Caleb laughed too. Maybe he was being manipulated. Maybe he was making another mistake. Maybe this would all fall apart eventually. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something like hope. They returned to the canyon 2 weeks later, a larger group this time. Not just the survivors of the fight, but others who'd heard what happened and wanted to be part of rebuilding. Families who'd been scattered, individuals who'd been hiding, all coming together to reclaim what had been stolen. The land hail had destroyed was a mess. Torn earth, poisoned streams, trees cut down for mined timber. But it was theirs again, legally and officially, with papers signed by judges and stamped by territorial authorities. And slowly, painstakingly, they began to heal it. Caleb found his role organically. He wasn't a leader. That was Kuanyauma and Ayana and Takoda, people who understood the culture and history and what needed to be preserved. But he was a teacher, a planner, someone who could help organize the work and train people in skills that would keep them safe. He taught them how to build proper defenses, not for war but for protection, how to organize watches and patrols, how to negotiate with the authorities who inevitably came asking questions, how to stand firm without being aggressive, how to assert rights without inviting retaliation. And gradually, the settlement grew. Not back to what it had been, that was gone forever. And trying to recreate it would have been denying the reality of everything that had happened. But into something new, something that honored the past while building toward a different future. Caleb's cabin, when it was finished, was small and simple, built into the canyon wall not far from Kuanyama's dwelling. It had a door that latched and a roof that didn't leak, and windows that let in the morning light. It was more home than he'd had in years. One evening, 6 months after the trial, he sat outside watching the sunset with Ayana. She'd moved slower that day, the old wound bothering her in the cold weather, but she'd still spent the afternoon helping organize food stores for winter. She never stopped moving, never stopped working, never stopped pushing herself and everyone else to be better. You think it'll last? Caleb asked. All of this. The peace, the rebuilding, the hope. I don't know, Ayana said honestly. Maybe, maybe not. There'll be other men like Hale, other threats, other fights. The world doesn't change overnight just because we want it to. She looked at him. But we're here now, we're building something, and that matters, even if it doesn't last forever. You sound like Kuanyama. I'll take that as a compliment. She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching the light fade from the sky. You ever regret it? Staying? Every day, Caleb said, then smiled at her indignant expression. I'm joking. Mostly. It's hard, this life, harder than running, but it's also, he struggled to find the right word. Real. It feels real in a way nothing has for a long time. That's because you're letting yourself feel things again, letting yourself care. It's terrifying and painful and wonderful all at once. Yeah, that's pretty much it. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the settlement, someone was singing, a traditional song Caleb had heard before but didn't understand the words to. Children's laughter echoed off the canyon walls. Life continuing. I talked to Pierce last week, Ayana said. He's putting together a proposal for the territorial legislature, new laws protecting native lands, requirements for mining permits, oversight committees to prevent what Hale did from happening again. Think it'll pass? Probably not, at least not the first time. But Pierce says you keep pushing, keep fighting, keep making noise until eventually something changes. Maybe not everything you want, but something. She smiled. It's a long game. I'm learning that. Over the following months, that long game became Caleb's life. Not the dramatic, violent conflict of the canyon battle, but the slower, harder work of building systems and structures that would outlast any individual. He testified before legislative committees. He helped draft proposals for land protection. He traveled to other settlements, sharing what they'd learned about organizing and protecting themselves within the legal system. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he left the cavalry. It wasn't heroic or glorious or anything that would be written about in history books. But it was meaningful. It mattered. And slowly, grudgingly, he started to believe that maybe he could do more good in the world than harm. Dakota became his closest ally in this work, the young man's anger channeled into productive action. Together, they created training programs that taught communities how to document abuses, how to work with lawyers, how to use the law as a weapon instead of accepting it as an enemy. It wasn't perfect. The system was still rigged against them in 100 different ways, but it was better than nothing, and sometimes better than nothing was enough. A year after the trial, Caleb stood at the burial site where they'd laid Neshoba and Kiona and Yuma to rest. Someone had carved markers, simple but dignified, with their names and a symbol Caleb didn't recognize but understood meant something important. You thinking about them? Ayana asked, joining him. Always, Caleb said, wondering if it was worth it, if what we built justifies what they paid. Nothing justifies it. That's not how it works. She knelt, placing fresh flowers at the base of each marker. They died fighting for something they believed in. They died free, on their feet, making a choice. That's more than most people get in this world. Doesn't make it fair. No, it doesn't. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. But fairness isn't guaranteed. Justice isn't guaranteed. The only thing we can do is fight for them anyway, every day, in small ways and large. That's how we honor the dead, by making sure their deaths meant something. Caleb thought about all the dead he carried, from this fight and from others. The weight of them would never truly leave him, would never stop pressing on his conscience in quiet moments. But maybe that was as it should be. Maybe forgetting would be the real betrayal. I'm staying, he said, not just for a while, for good. Ayana's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I know, Kuanyama told me weeks ago. She said she saw it in your eyes. You'd finally stopped running. That old woman sees too much. That's what makes her wise. Ayana took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Come on. She's making dinner and threatened to beat both of us if we're late. They walked back toward the settlement together, hand in hand, two people who'd survived the worst and chosen to build something better from the wreckage. Behind them, the canyon was filling with the sounds of evening, voices calling to each other, hammers finishing the day's work, children playing in the last light. It wasn't paradise. It wasn't perfect. There were still threats, still challenges, still days when everything felt impossible. But it was theirs, built by their hands, defended by their courage, sustained by their stubborn refusal to give up. Caleb Rourke, who'd once believed he was beyond redemption, who'd spent 2 years running from himself and finding only emptiness, had finally discovered something worth staying for. Not because he'd earned it or deserved it, but because he'd chosen it, because he'd stood up when standing up mattered, and kept standing even when it got hard. That night, sitting around Kawanyama's fire with Ayana beside him and the community he'd helped build around him, Caleb felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Not happiness, that was too simple a word for something this complex, but peace, purpose. The knowledge that his life, whatever else it had been, meant something now. Kuanyauma raised her cup in a toast. To the fallen, who gave us this chance, and to the living, who must make it count. They drank together, the bitter tea warming them from the inside. And in that moment, sitting among people who'd become family, in a place that had become home, Caleb understood something fundamental about redemption. It wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about being forgiven or absolved or made clean. It was about choosing every single day to be better than you were, to stand up for something, to build something, to matter to someone. It was about recognizing that you'd done terrible things and then doing the hard work of creating good things anyway, not because it balanced the scales, but because it was the only way forward. The road ahead was long and uncertain. There would be more fights, more setbacks, more moments when everything seemed hopeless. But they would face it together, these survivors and fighters and stubborn, fierce people who refused to disappear. And that, Caleb thought as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, was enough. Not perfect, not easy, but enough. He'd spent most of his life being part of the problem. Now, finally, he was part of the solution. And if that wasn't redemption exactly, it was close enough to live with. The story of Victor Hale's fall became legend in the territory. A cautionary tale about greed and power, yes, but also a story about resistance, about people who'd been pushed to the edge and chose to push back, about ordinary individuals doing extraordinary things because someone had to, and they happened to be there. Pierce's legislative proposals eventually passed, though in watered-down form. Not everything they'd hoped for, but enough to create real protections and real consequences for future abuses. Other communities heard about what happened and started organizing, demanding their own justice, their own rights. The change was slow, maddeningly slow, but it was happening. And 5 years after that morning when Caleb had stood in Red Hollow and made the worst financial decision of his life, he stood in the same canyon and watched children play, children who would grow up knowing their land was protected, their rights recognized, their voices heard. Not perfectly, not completely, but more than the generation before them had known. Ayana stood beside him, older now, gray threading through her black hair, the wound in her side leaving her with a permanent limp she never complained about. They'd built a life together, not the romantic story people told, but the messy, complicated reality of two damaged people trying to heal while building something larger than themselves. "You think we did enough?" she asked. It was the question they always came back to, the question that had no good answer. "I think we did what we could," Caleb said. "And we're still doing it. That's all anyone can ask. Is it enough? Ask me again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until we're too old to ask anymore." He smiled at her. "That's the deal we made. Keep fighting, keep building, keep trying. We don't get to know if it's enough. We just get to keep doing it anyway." She nodded, accepting this the way she accepted all hard truths, without flinching, without complaint, just acknowledgement and determination to keep going. They walked back toward the settlement together, toward the life they'd built from blood and hope and stubborn refusal to accept the world as it was. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. It wasn't the ending Caleb had expected when he'd bought a woman off an auction block in a dusty frontier town, but it was the ending he'd earned, not through heroism or sacrifice, but through simple persistence, through showing up every day and doing the work, even when it was hard, even when it seemed pointless, even when he couldn't see the results, because that's what changing the world actually looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but ordinary people making small choices that accumulated into something larger. Standing up when it was easier to sit down. Speaking out when it was safer to stay silent. Building when destruction was the path of least resistance. Caleb Rourke had been a lot of things in his 40-some years. Soldier, killer, deserter, drunk, coward, hero. But in the end, he was just a man who'd made a choice, who'd seen something wrong and decided to do something about it, even when the cost was high and the outcome uncertain. And in a world that often felt dark and hopeless, that choice, repeated day after day by people like Ayana and Takota and Kuanyaoma and Pierce and countless others, was enough to push back the darkness, even if just a little. It had to be enough, because it was all they had. The stars came out, hard and bright against the deepening sky. And beneath them, in a canyon that had seen too much blood and too much death, life continued. Imperfect, messy, beautiful life, built by imperfect, messy, beautiful people who refused to quit. That was the real story. Not the battle or the trial or any of the dramatic moments that made good telling, but the days and months and years that came after, when the hard work of actually building something had to be done. And as Caleb sat with Ayana by their fire, surrounded by the community they'd helped create, he finally understood what redemption really meant. It wasn't about being forgiven. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about carrying all of it, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the failures, and choosing to do better anyway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights, new setbacks, new reasons to give up. But tomorrow was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, they had this moment, this fire, this peace, hard won and precious. And for now, that was enough.